Hey everyone, welcome to our BAM session today. Good to have everyone here with us. And if you have a camera, if you can turn that on, that might be kind of cool. If you have a mic, it might be kind of cool to turn that off. Make sure if it's already on. I think they're theoretically muted, but it kind of throws us off a little bit if somebody gets a phone call in the middle of it and they take the phone call and they're talking on the phone call and we can all hear it while we're trying to do a BAM session. Not that we have anything against that, but yeah. Okay, so lots of good, bright, smiley faces today, some somber faces, but those are welcome as well. Glad to have everyone here today, and I think we have people still coming through the doors. So, but we're trying to get ramped up for the big NAR changes coming on. Who's excited about the NAR changes? Yeah, not really. Most people aren't. I can't think of any people. The only people I can think of who are excited about the NAR changes are the attorneys that made hundreds of millions of dollars in the lawsuit. But you know what? I guarantee there's going to be so many more lawsuits that are going to come up over the next couple of years as the consumers start to figure out what happened. Because most of them don't even realize. They're like, oh, yeah, great. Realtors are going to work for free. This is great. But then when they start realizing that they're buying houses without representation and then getting hosed in the deal and getting into catastrophic problems, there's going to be lots of lawsuits. So, but we want to make sure we're ready for all the changes, and those are coming up. August 17th will be the big ones. That's when we have to use buyer agreements, and then so that will be the NAR rules, and then the state rules take into effect. At least for Ohio, it takes into effect in October. So, but we want to make sure that everything's pretty tight. But let me go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and open up my, do a screen share here. And hopefully you can see my screen. And I wanted to, let me see, let me hit the play button. There we go. Okay, so I wanted to go back quickly through some of the content that we talked about last week, because I think we had so many questions that were great questions that I want to make sure we have the content, but then I want to give you more time to ask more questions today. And I want to keep repeating this stuff because I want to make sure you've got it entrenched in your brain, what's going to happen here very shortly, and how to respond to the market, and how to not just respond, but to get ahead of it and be proactive and be ready for those changes. Whenever there's big changes in the market, there's always opportunity. Like if you remember back to the Great Recession, some of you were in the business back then, back in early 2000s, 2007, 8, 9, 10. Through that period, there were lots of terrible things taking place in the market. And while lots of agents were having a very difficult time selling homes, remarkably, some people were getting filthy rich. They were going after, short sales and going after foreclosures. And some people became just terribly, sickeningly sick, rich through that whole process. I mean, it was sickening to those who weren't able to be a part of that. So some people got ahead of the curve. They were ready for it, and they did great. So I'm encouraging you to be ready, look for opportunity. And one of the opportunities that we have in this process is that we've created some of our own forums. We've got our own approach to how we're going to do this. I think that will give us an unfair advantage over many of our competitors. And by the way, the documents that we've created, these are proprietary. So please don't share these outside of Plum Tree, but you can use them as a hook to draw people into Plum Tree. And maybe this will help you get some recruiting bonuses if you can draw people in. So the rules will take place beginning August 17th. That's the buyer agency rules. Commissions and different MLSs are already starting to be erased from MLSs. Cincinnati and I think Cleveland, Columbus, a lot of them are Dayton, getting rid of the commission field in the MLS. And so be ready. Those who are prepared will win. So, and then House Bill 466 and Indiana Act 1068 also makes these rules are actually also incorporated into law. So that's a bad thing, but it's also a good thing, because when we're presenting this information to buyers and clients, we can let them know this isn't just our crazy rule. This is a law. All agents have to do this now. So buyer agency document options. So we talked about this last week, but basically what we've done is we've created a couple documents for our agents. If you would like to use them, we're not requiring our documents. You can use any of these documents, but we've got a loyalty agreement, which meets the requirements of a buyer's agreement. We have a touring agreement, which also meets those requirements. Now, just a footnote, the loyalty agreement does meet the NAR requirements and the state requirements for agency relationship prior to being in contract, but the touring agreement does not completely fit all of the mandates by the state of Ohio for buyer agreements, and by that I mean the touring agreement. You can use that at the beginning of your relationship with your client, but at some point prior to submitting an offer, you have to have an agency agreement with them, and so the Plum Tree loyalty agreement would suffice for that. But just want to make sure I clarify with that. But I am going to show you these documents if I can. So our loyalty agreement, and by the way, I sent this out this weekend, and we had some terrific feedback from some of our leadership and some of our agents. And we've actually tweaked it a little bit just based on some of the feedback that we've gotten. Basically, the loyalty agreement, this is a buyer agency. It's an exclusive buyer agency agreement. And we tweaked it a little bit. One of the things was that we added the 289, the transaction fee, to the compensation field, just to make sure there's no confusion to buyers and that somebody doesn't come back later and point out that it wasn't in this document. So additionally, we added this little clause here: broker fees and commissions are fully negotiable and are not set by law. The real estate profession will not receive compensation for brokerage services from any other source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed upon to this agreement by the buyer. So wanted to make sure we had that phrasing in there. Now, based on some conversations we had last week, I think Chris Johnson made the recommendation in our BAM session about having a protection period in the agreement. And after thinking that through, I thought that is a pretty good idea. So we added a protection period, and is in particular in the one that we sent out this last week for you to review. We had a separate section for protection agreement, but as we were trying to tweak it and keep it, editing it to make it as refined and precise as we could, it was getting pretty long. So I went ahead and incorporated the protection period into the phrasing of this document. So the protection period is, this document is an exclusive agency agreement. Therefore, if the home buyer uses a different agent, or, and this is another addition that we put in there, or goes directly to the seller to complete the purchase of a home that was shown by this buyer's agent during the term of this agreement, or within 30 days of the expiration of this agreement, then the home buyer will still be obligated to pay the buyer's agent commission compensation to the real estate professional as outlined in this agreement. So that basically gives a 30-day protection period. So what we wanted to avoid was a buyer saying, hey, my agreement expires in 2 days, and I know we already looked at this house. After this expires, I'm going to go to them directly and try to work out a deal. So this gives you at least another 30 days where if they do that within a month, then you will be compensated properly. So, but other than that, this is basically the agreement. And we covered this in a little more detail last week, but I just want to make sure that you guys are reading this. And I can tell some of you are really studying it and you really know what you're doing. And I appreciate that. But this is basically our agreement as we have it. So, okay, so that's that. So this is airtight as far as NAR rules go and as far as state law goes. Now, this touring agreement is a simplified version. This is a non-agency agreement. So this is a buyer agreement. That's what's required by NAR, is that you have a buyer agreement. It doesn't say agency agreement. It says a buyer agreement. So this is an agreement, and you have to include compensation. So, and you have to have a start date and an end date. So we've got that. And then you have the, basically we're saying this is, let me see, for the no fee for touring services. The buyer will not owe or pay the broker any fee for the touring services. So if the broker provides more services beyond the touring services, the buyer and broker will sign a separate agreement for those additional services. So this is kind of a bridge document. This is sort of like an engagement ring, or this is sort of like like you're dating. Personally, I would keep this period here, the duration, I would keep this very short. And the whole purpose of this is to try not to freak out buyers the first time you meet them at a property so that they're freaked out like, oh my gosh, they want me to sign a 4 or 5 page contract guaranteeing I don't even know who this person is. Like, how dare they ask me to sign this? So this is to bridge that gap for that type of client that you need a little bit of time to get to know them. You can think of this as a touring agreement. It's also sort of like a dating agreement. So, hey, let's get to know each other. And I would say for a week. I would probably do this for a week. And your whole objective, once you get this signed and you show some homes, is to set the appointment for a buyer strategy session. Okay. So that's where I would be totally focused. The first week or so, your whole goal is to set up a buyer strategy session with that buyer. Now, there's some agents, if you're a student of the top agents in the country and you watch YouTube videos of the very best, the elite agents in the country, they've been doing this for years. Okay. Agents who don't do this, that would mean you're sort of at an entry level type of approach to your business. But the very serious agents nationwide who work with buyers and are making millions of dollars working at an elite level, they all do a buyer strategy session or a buyer consultation. So don't think that this is just something weird that we came up with. This is what the elite agents have been doing for decades. So you want to set up, and it can be done in a lot of ways, and I'll go over that. But you want to set up a meeting where you can get from this touring agreement into getting into the loyalty agreement. So let me get back into this. So you've got the 4 options: the buyer loyalty agreement, the touring agreement. But then some agents are used to using the state of Ohio, or Indiana, Florida, Kentucky, using those state forms, and that's fine. Just about every state has their own library of forms, and they will have a buyer agency agreement, no problem. If you would like to use those, no problem at all. And we will have those in .loop prior to August 17th. So the state board, but also local boards are coming out with buyer agency agreements, and different agents just have different ways of doing things. So we're looking at this as our NAR settlement toolbox. So you'll have many tools to use and it might be that you have this type of buyer over here, but then you have a family member over here, and then you have someone that it's on the you coach soccer for their kids, and they're in this little category. So there's different types of buyers, and depending on the buyer, you might use a different type of agreement. So, okay, so your number one strategy is going to be to set up a buyer strategy session. So this will be your central game plan. So make this a high priority of your business plan now, is to perfect a buyer strategy session, sort of like a listing appointment. So you want to set this up, and as soon as you can, make a beeline to that. So how do you do these sessions? Well, I would propose there's 4 ways of doing it. You can do it through a phone call, you can do it through a Zoom call, you can do it through an in-person meeting, and you can do it in the driveway at the at the first house that you're showing on a particular day. So phone call is great, but you want to have a set phone call. So when you get that lead, I would say, hey, great, I'd like to do a strategy session with you. Would you have time for a quick phone call before we go out and take a look at that property? And then I would set up the phone call and make sure you have a time on your calendar where you sit down and they're serious about it and you're serious, and you have a good 10 or 15-minute phone call. Or you can do it through a Zoom call. And a Zoom call, I think, adds a heightened level of professionalism. It also gives you time to figure out if they're a real live person, or if they just maybe if there's a threat involved, maybe they just got out of prison. We literally had a buyer lead one time where the buyer wanted to meet one of our female agents at a property at 9 o'clock at night in a weird part of town. And she did her own background search and figured out he literally just got out of prison the week before for sexual crimes, sexual violence. So a Zoom call can help. The strategy session is actually a great component to your safety measures that you take prior to meeting a client. So Zoom call would be great. And then an in-person meeting, I love doing these. Hey, we're going to meet at that house on Friday at 6. Would you have time to meet me at Starbucks about 30 minutes before that? It's right around the corner. And I'd like to at least set up a strategy to make sure we're on the same page for helping you find a home. So I would focus on the word strategy. And some people call it a consultation, but for me, I prefer the word strategy rather than consultation. Consultation, it just sounds like, hey, I'm doing a timeshare presentation. It's going to be 90 minutes. Would you like to attend? No. Most people don't want to attend a sales presentation, but a strategy session gives you a little bit better approach. And you literally want that strategy session to be a strategy session. You want to set up a strategy for helping them to find a home. So, but sometimes people don't have time, or they're hesitant to meet with you ahead of time. So the touring agreement, get that signed in the driveway prior to going in the house for your first showing. Absolutely fine. So, but in Ohio, beginning in October, before you write a contract, you have to have an agency agreement with your clients before you write a contract. So that's important to know. So the touring agreement's great to get you, into the dating mode with your clients, but you're going to have an agency agreement prior to writing a contract. If you have questions, feel free to write those out in the chat section, and Scott's going to help me with those later. Or you can write them down and then ask them out loud here in a little bit. So, Okay, so what do you do in a buyer strategy session? Um, I would, here are the things I would do. I would start out, discuss the buyer needs, their dreams, their motivations, goals, time frame for buying a home. Make sure you know everything about them. And I would take a notepad, make sure you learn, get to know them. Why are they doing this? What's their next step? Do they have the house to sell? So then you get as much information as you can from these buyers. And then you uh, transition into talking about the current market conditions. Well, here's what we're looking at in the market right now, especially that neighborhood that's going to be tight. So explain to them the market, help them. So you become a teacher and you're teaching them what to expect, and let them know the timeline, and let them know the process. Let them know all the things that are going to happen. You're going to have to get pre-approved. You're going to submit an offer. You're going to look at homes, submit an offer. You're going to have to get inspections, negotiate inspections, get fully approved through your financing. That's going to have to go through an appraisal, and then walk them through each of the steps. And I would just say, help them understand this is a fairly complex process. This isn't like buying a car. Like they're investing in a massive investment, but you're there to help them through the process. And then I would mention the state laws that require buyers must now sign an agency agreement. And if you're in Kentucky, you don't have to say state law, or Florida yet. I'm sure there will be laws soon. But at this point, there are definitely rules in place where we all have to have agency agreements prior to showing homes and writing offers. So I would explain that, and I would discuss how agency works. I would keep it fairly simple, but I would say some agents represent buyers, some represent sellers, some represent both. Some people feel like it might be a conflict of interest for an agent to represent both, because it's sort of like having one attorney in a lawsuit representing both parties. How would that work? Not well. So if you get sued by another person, would you want their attorney to represent you as well? Well, no. You want to have your own attorney who's going to watch out for your interests. And it's the same way in a real estate transaction. And so I would personally, during this part of the conversation, I would explain the downfall, the pitfalls of dual agency, just in case they have the idea in mind of going to the listing agent directly to write the offer. So then I would discuss the role and value of a buyer's agent, explain how you're going to help them through manage the levels of complexity. There's going to be 36 people that are going to touch the transaction between now and the time that you close. And my job is to make sure they're all moving in the same direction. And there can be catastrophic mistakes and problems that come up along the way. And you might not even discover it for 5 or 10 years after you purchase the house. But my role is to help as best as I can to protect you from things that you may not be aware of at the time that you're purchasing the house. So you want to set yourself up as an expert who can guide them to a safe and through a safe and simple process. And I would use that wording as much as you can: safe and simple. Those are the key words that you want to. And I would have those recorded in your brain, and I would repeat that recording over and over and over. We're going to make this safe, and we're going to make this simple for you. It's a very complex process, but we're going to make it simple for you. And it can lead to catastrophic problems, but we're going to make it safe for you. So then discussing buyer's agent compensation, the way I would do it is I would say, okay, so the way my fees as an agent are, I charge 3%. So now I'm not telling you all that's what you have to charge. If it were Chris Russell, if I were doing it, I would charge 3% for my services. It definitely wouldn't be worth it for me to do it for less than that. Maybe 2% if it's a friend. But I would just say my fees are 3%. And most of the time that's paid by the sellers. traditionally that's been most of the time paid by the sellers. However, I can't guarantee that. So if there's a situation where the seller won't pay it, or if they'll only pay a portion of it, then you would be responsible for the remainder of that, which would be added to your closing costs as a part of your purchase when we close the deal. So does that make sense? That's how I would describe it. One of the most important things you can learn as a salesperson is to be quiet. Okay. So you present that, and I would practice it. If I were you, I would practice saying it in a way that you know that you've got it down. You know how to say it in a way that's not offensive. But I would say it. I'd say my fees are 3%, and I would look them in the eye. I charge 3% for this, and then most of the time, it's paid for by the seller. We can't guarantee that. I'll definitely negotiate it to be paid by the seller. But sometimes there might be a seller who says they're not willing to pay that, or they're not willing to pay all of that. So in that situation, then you would pay the remainder of the commission, whatever that they're not willing to pay. And that will be added to your closing costs. And that will be added to your closing statement. It becomes part of your closing costs when you purchase the home. Does that make sense? And then you be quiet. You look them in the eye and be quiet. And so let them, if now that's the point where they'll say, yeah, sure, that makes sense. I understand. I get it. Okay, great. Sign here. If there's a hesitation, this is where they will bring that up. They might say, well, I can't do it. We don't have the money for your commission up front. We just can't do it. In that type of situation, that's when negotiating, that's when you become a negotiator. Okay. So you have to determine what's it worth for me to work with this buyer. So, one approach to negotiation would be, that you could drop your commission. You could say, well, I'd be willing to do it. And there will be agents doing this. Some will say, hey, heck, I need the money. My car payment's due, and I'll do it for 1%. So okay, whatever. You can drop your commission. That's certainly a negotiation strategy. But another strategy is to let them know, hey, I will do all that I can to get it from the other. Have the sellers pay that. As a matter of fact, even if the seller is pay it, you're still paying it, because it's all that money, all commissions come from the buyer's loan that they get for the house and the payment. That's how the seller is paid anyway. So it comes from you one way or another. So I'm happy to negotiate that into the deal each time we submit an offer, if you would like. So, and if you want, we don't even have to look at properties. If it's your desire, we don't have to look at properties if they are not willing to pay that. So, those are a couple ways of phrasing that. But at that point, you have to put your negotiating hat on. And it could be that there's somebody there might be a person who says, yeah, I'm tapping out. I can't sign that. I'm not going to work with the buyer's agent. So that's fine. And I don't know how it's worked for you. I've been in this business for several decades. There's always buyers who get, who get weird and don't end up closing a deal, or they, you find out before closing that, they've got some other thing going on with another agent, or they, there's always all kinds of shady things that happen. Okay. So it's just part of the business. And I'd rather shake them loose before you spend 40 hours with them, rather than, spend 40 hours with them and then they pull a fast one. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if you have to let somebody walk away at this point. I would rather shake them loose early in the process rather than invest a lot of time. So anyway, those are some thoughts. That's how I would approach it. And so then working with sellers, I would make sure they know almost all buyers use an agent. Almost no buyers have the cash to front the money for an agent in addition to closing costs and down payment. So I would set the expectations for your sellers that if they think all buyers are now just going to pull out an extra bundle of cash, they're not thinking through the process. Almost nobody has that money up front, and the buyers are the ones paying all commissions through their loan anyway. So make sure that they know that. Those are important points to bring out. So you have to ask if you're not going to offer a commission to a buyer's agent, you have to understand that's going to eliminate many of the buyers, like most of the buyers. So how much of the market are you willing to eliminate up front? That's the question. So like if you only went with cash buyers, that's going to limit the number of buyers you have on the house, right? So what happens to the price of the house? If you put a note on there, you're only accepting cash buyers, then the price drops because the demand has dropped. So your goal should be to get as many people through your home as possible. So you want to make the market as big as possible to support a higher price for your house in order to make the transaction happen. And then I can also say historically, 70% of listings that have offered less than 2% to a buyer's agent have never sold. Okay, that's historical. And it's just good to be aware of that data. So are you wanting to list your home, or are you wanting to just list it, or you actually want to sell it? So those are some of the points I would bring out with sellers. Here's how to, let me see, my screen's doing a weird thing. Yeah, here's how to simplify everything. Here's how to simplify the whole process. Let's see here. Okay, when working with buyers, here's another strategy I would use. When I'm working with buyers, I would not waste time calling agents and asking them about commissions. Okay, this is part of the nightmare that we've all been imagining, right? Okay, I've got a buyer. I'm doing 10 showings on Saturday, and do I text all of those agents and find out what they're willing to pay? So let's just say, what would happen if you texted them and found out that half of them are willing to pay 3%, 2 of them are willing to pay 2%, and 3 of them are not offering any commission at all? How would that look for you? You would then have to explain to your buyer, and they might say, I know they're not offering a commission, but can we look at it anyway and try to get them to pay? So you're going to have all these weird conversations if you're trying to focus on each listing and how much they're offering. So if it were me, I would completely scrub all of that. I wouldn't be texting any agents asking them, how much are they offering for buyer's agent commission. I would just get away from that whole mindset. I would schedule all 10 homes. If they want to write an offer, I would say, great, let's write the offer. And whatever the commission is that you've agreed to with your buyer, I would write that into the contract for that home. That's the way I would do it. And that's why in the buyer's agency agreement, I would make that number, I'd make that the actual high number that I'm planning to get for a commission. So if I'm wanting to get 3%, I would definitely make that in your buyer's agency agreement. And then I would ask for that in the purchase contract. So then you don't have to be calling everyone. At that point, then all you have to do is negotiate on behalf of your buyer for the buyer's agent commission. So you just put a little note in the purchase contract that says seller will pay whatever percent to buyer's agent commission. So at closing. So that's if you're working with buyers. And if you're working with sellers, this would be an excellent response. And I heard some people talking about this week from at a session that Scott and I attended. Basically, your response when people, if you're listing a property and you get all these agents who are saying, hey, are they willing to pay a commission? Are they willing to pay commission? I would have this response. I would copy it and paste it for all those agents that are asking. I would say buyer's agent commission is dependent upon the strength of your offer. Okay. So if you use that as your response, then that can also, that actually benefits your seller, right? And if you are at a listing appointment and you tell your sellers, maybe they're asking about commissions and not, you want to brief them, make sure they understand the ins and outs. And I would make sure they're emotionally prepared to pay a commission. But I would tell them my strategy for when I list properties is not to automatically offer 3% or 2%. That, as your listing agent, this is my advice to you. I wouldn't put it out there automatically to pay 3% or 2%. Because what if a buyer's agent has agreed with his buyer to 2% and we offer 3%? Then you're losing a percentage point there. So my job for you, I'm going to fight for you. So I say we list the property, and our response will be that the buyer's agent commission will be dependent upon the strength of an offer. So what type of a signal does that give to the buyer's agent? That tells the buyer's agent, wow, we need to make a good offer, right? And that benefits your seller client when you negotiate on their behalf. So you want to negotiate when you're representing a buyer, negotiate hard on their behalf. When you're representing a seller, you want to negotiate hard on their behalf. And I truly believe this approach will get you more listings if you set it up for that type of an approach. So okay, so that's all I've got there. Before now, Scott has a quick run through. I think now is a good time to do this, just to make sure we get this in. Scott has a great way to show us how on your Plum Tree website, your personal website, you have the ability, if you would like, to be able to write and customize your website to include your listings and how much of a co-op commission your clients are offering on each of those specific listings. So without further ado, let's all have a fine round of applause for Scott Reif as he comes to the stage and explains how to do this.
Can I bring up some questions first?
Yes.
We've had some great questions in the chat.
Okay.
Annette asked for clarification. Can the seller, can the buyer be asked to pay the $289 transaction fee? Her recollection was that the buyer is not able to pay that. That's always been the case. However, the VA did have a new rule where the buyer can pay some real estate fees. That's referring to the buyer being able to pay their own commission. So will that now make it so the buyer can pay a transaction fee? So in the background, I've been texting Dawn about this, and her response was, let's see what Chris says. So that's, you may not know the answer right now, but that's something we'll have to look at, is now that the VA is allowing the buyer to pay some commission, can they pay that transaction fee?
That's an excellent question, which I've definitely, we're going to cover that next week because I don't know the answer today.
Okay.
That's the actual answer.
Okay. Michelle had a good question too, and this came up in some of our comments over the weekend in Plum Tree Agent Connect. Let's say you have a contract pending upon the listing. You do not have a commission agreement because the commission was already posted in the MLS. And between now and when you close, that commission is being taken out of the MLS. Someone had a good idea. I apologize, I forget who suggested it, but they said they're going to be printing all of their listings out or saving a PDF from the MLS so that they have a record of the compensation that was offered before that information was taken out, which is an excellent idea. I told Michelle that that's what they should do. Do you think there's a need to do any type of commission agreements on things that are already pending, or do we trust the commission that was published in the MLS before it was taken away?
We can trust the MLS that was prior to it being taken away. That is definitely a contract with our membership. It will definitely still suffice. It's not a bad idea. I think Meg Perez recommended printing those out. I think that was a good idea.
That's who it was. Yes.
It's never a bad idea to have documentation. You can't have too much documentation, and there might be some agent who thinks they can slip out of it. A listing agent, because the rules have changed. But if you're already in contract on a deal, they will still have to honor that. And even if you don't print it out, the MLS does have retroactive history of the listing, so you could get proof. But it simplifies if you already have the printout, and you can just email it over to the broker and say, "Hey, just want to make sure you understand where we're going with this. Here's the documentation."
So that's something agents don't need to be concerned about.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Let me share my screen here and see. Can you guys see that? You see in my screen? You seeing the conversion?
That's great.
Okay, great. So I'm logged into conversion, and what you want to do is I'm in the main dashboard here. Go under website and customize my website. You'll have there's template options you can choose from. Choose the hero template. What you have in the middle here is preference things like, do you want your picture to show up? What background do you want to use? That's really not important. One thing that I found that was pretty helpful in conversion is this carousel, and it will determine what content shows up on your website that's auto-populated. So you can populate from the MLS or for MLS data. For example, I wanted to make my website look local. So I put in a couple of my favorite zip codes where I do the most activity. So if you just put in the zip code here, you'll see that on your website. When you're done with that, you want to click activate, and that'll activate on your website. So the nice thing about this conversion website is it's very easy to customize. It's very easy to edit. I will say from firsthand experience, I was so intimidated by the conversion website at first. I avoided using it for a really long time because for some reason it freaked me out. But once I got into it and got used to it, I realized, okay, this is pretty easy, and there are some pretty robust customization things in here. I'm going to start off with just clear customization, get everything out of it, and open site editor. So this is a edit version of my website, and this is where I can go in and edit. And then here is the default sections that are there. So if I had active listings, they would be listed here. So right now it's listing Plum Tree listings. But here is the section you can edit. And just going to take everything out here. And here's where you can put in whatever you want. So let's say the commission on 123 Main. Maybe we'll start off with a title: buyer, agent, compensation available. And you can get fancy. Like if you know how to do a Word document, you can do this. So it's pretty simple. And then we'll say 123. Let's get off the bold. 123 Main Street. Say 2.5%. An important thing is, how do you get agents here? Okay, in your agent remarks in the MLS, you are able to direct an agent to your website. So for example, in my agent remarks, and we've Ann Taylor from the did a training with the Dayton Board of Realtors, and she's an attorney. She said, yes, this is allowed. You are able to put in the agent remarks, you're able to reference your website. So in my agent remarks, I would write, for additional information, go to scottreif.plumtreerealty.com. You would put, for additional information, your website. So, and here's where we can provide that. We have agents going here. So rather than having an agent text you before every showing or call you to ask what the buyer's agent compensation is, you can just put the text on your website. You could also use a statement like Chris said, buyers, oops. Is how did you say that? Dependent upon the offer?
Dependent upon the strength of the offer.
Okay. There you go. So, you could maybe put that for a different property. We'll put 124 Main Street. We are crushing the Main Street market, listing all kinds of, so you could just put that for each of your listings. You can put that. When you're done, click save successful, and go back, preview your website. Look at that. Customizable language there. So it's that simple.
Nice. It's nice to
Does
have
that make sense?
it's nice to have a tech geek on our team. This is good. So some of you might have questions about that, and a lot of times you might have a question after you're like in 2 weeks from now. So Scott can help you with that.
And there is a video uploaded to Plum Tree Agent Connect, just a 5-minute video showing that. So if you need reference, how do I do that again? You don't have to watch the whole BAM. There is a 4-minute video out there explaining it.
Julie Enderhees, did you have a question?
Sorry, I'm trying to get this on mute. I'm out here getting my car fixed and jumping on real quick. Can you write that in the agent's remarks? The buyer's agent commission is dependent upon the strength of the offer. Can you put that in the remarks?
Sadly, as of right now, we cannot because we're not allowed to have any reference to a buyer's agent commission in the MLS. So it's unfortunate. So because of that, what most agents, I would say 80% of agents, they're going to be spending their Fridays and Saturdays texting agents, hey, what's the commission? What's the commission? What's the commission? So I would just have that standard answer. I would copy and paste it into all those texts. And the good thing is you, on the buyer side, you don't have to be the agent sending out 20 text messages on Fridays and Saturdays, because all you have to do is write it into the offer, because you have to write it into the offer anyway. Because just because they send you a text message that says they're going to offer 3% buyer's agent commission, that's the chances of that standing up in the court of law are very low. So you want to make sure you have it in the purchase contract itself, or there's an addendum that Marcy has referred to before, where it specifically delineates buyer's agent commissions. So.
Chris, we did have a comment in the chat. Someone took an NAR class, and in their class, they specifically said you cannot refer to a website in your agent remarks. So that's contrary to what the attorney that taught the class I was in said, and you watched the class too. So we'll probably see a lot of this where we think we have a solution. The rules change. Stick with us. We're learning this as we go. But that is we were specifically told. I even asked Chris. I said, "Hey, do you remember her saying that?" And he said, "Yes." He thought you could too. So we'll see.
And that's a good point. One of the things I've noticed in my whole life is that there's a certain, it might be 50% of the population. I'm not sure what the percentage is, but there's a lot of people who have a tendency toward legalism, and their legalism, like their legalism can appear. So if they see a rule, they're going to create another rule just to make sure they don't break this other rule. So if NAR gives us a rule, there's people, especially a lot of them have attorney plaques on their wall. They're going to say, just to make sure we don't break that rule, we're going to create these other 10 rules to make sure we don't break that rule. So we've got this fence. We don't want anyone to jump over this fence. So we're going to build another fence around the fence to make sure they can't possibly do that. Some of you are in Lexington, you know about the horses. A lot of times there'll be ranches that they'll have double fences, right? And to make sure the horses can't jump over, they'll have two fences they have a fence to make sure they don't jump over that fence. Well, some people do that in business where they'll create extra rules. And so I'm not really interested in the extra rules that people come up with. I'm interested in what does the law say and what does the NAR say that's going to keep me from being able to use the MLS? You know, for me to be able to obey their rules, what is that rule? So, so from what we've researched so far and gotten legal input on, is that you can make a reference in the MLS to an external website for the commission. However, each MLS can kind of come up with their own rules. So we'll take it a week at a time and kind of see how that all pans out. I did notice Christy had a question when we're talking about putting in buyer's agent commission is dependent upon the strength of your offer. And Christy mentioned, how does that work if you already have it in the listing agreement? So if you have in the listing agreement that the sellers will pay 2% towards a buyer's agent commission or 3% towards a buyer's agent commission, if that's in the listing agreement, you can, that's a private contract between you and your sellers, okay? So you can market that however you want. So if you can have a discussion with the sellers, do you want me to get the word out that you're willing to pay a 3% co-op? Because obviously that's a pretty strong commission that you probably get more agents showing your property. Would you like us to do it that way? But another approach that we could take is we could just write in there that the buyer's agent commission is dependent upon the strength of the offer. So, so let your sellers decide. And if you have that type of a value proposition that you have those two different strategies and the seller has those options, I mean, that's going to make you look like a smarter, better agent along the way. So that's how I would approach that. There was a question also on the loyalty agreement about having a flat rate. I don't know if this has come up in today's discussion, but having a flat rate commission as opposed to a percentage. And we've put a lot of thought into that. And this initial document is the one that we're going to make public for our Plum Tree agents that has the commission based on a percentage, because I think that is that's going to be in general the way the vast majority of agents are going to move. And we didn't want to confuse people by having a big complicated document that has different payment structures. Like we don't necessarily, if someone's willing to pay a percentage, we don't necessarily even want to put it in their mind that, well, what if you just pay us $1,000? Maybe that will work. You know, I don't want to put that in their mind. If they're already thinking 3%, I don't want to get them, you know, I don't want to mess up the deal. So this document doesn't include that. So there's two options. Some of you are perfectly fine, and it's a part of your business strategy to work on a flat fee rate, and that's cool. If that's you, if you are fine working, say $2,500, I'll do it for $2,500. and you want that. There's two ways you can handle that. One is you can cross out the percentage, and you can tell your clients, most of them are going to take a big percentage of your house. I have a flat rate, so I'm going to cross out this percentage, and I'm going to write in $2,500. So that shows that you're different than the majority of agents. So that gives you some credibility if you have that type of an approach. The other thing, if you are really wanting a document that says a flat rate, has that on there, we can create that for you and have another form. It just won't be uploaded to .lu. So text me or Scott if you would like to have that flat rate version of the loyalty agreement. We can make sure you have access to that. But we didn't want to upload it because this is such a complicated new way of doing business. We're trying to keep it as simple as we possibly can. So any other thoughts or questions? Christina, I see that hand.
Sorry about that. I'm having technical issues this morning, so sorry.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, it's been a Monday for sure. I just have a few questions. So I'm good at handling stress, but I'm feeling overwhelmed probably just as every other realtor is. But what makes it worse is I get this email from Dayton the other day because I'm on both MLSs. And excuse me if you did answer this already, but Dayton has, I think, 4 to 5 forms and worksheets and all this stuff going on. So when I received that the other day after we had our BAM last Monday, and it says, please get with your broker if you have joined more than one MLS. So obviously I'm on both. So do I have to use Dayton's forms, or everything that you've laid out for us Plum Tree agents suffices everything?
It was breaking up there right at the end. Could you repeat that last sentence, please?
Yeah. So all the forms that you're giving us, that's NAR compliant and all that, can we just use those forms for both MLSs to sum up everything, or do we have to use Dayton's forms if we're doing a Dayton listing?
You do not have to use Dayton forms unless you choose to do so. So you can use Plum Tree forms for everything, or you can use the local Dayton forms or Cincinnati, or actually, I don't think you can use Cincinnati and Dayton because they've kind of drawn a line in the sand. They've decided to go 2 different directions on this one. But you can use the local board agreements, or you can use the state agreements, and the state agreements can be used in any market. But if it were me, I would use the Plum Tree one, but you can definitely use any of those options. That makes sense?
Yes, it does. So the current buyers and sellers that we have now, will we need to go get representation agreements before the 17th?
If they are not in contract and you anticipate they'll be looking for properties after August 17th, then yes, I would definitely get them in these agreements.
Okay, but the seller has no new form to sign. It's just the buyers. Am I accurate on that?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing a form, because the seller, obviously it's in the contract what they're offering. But yes, you're right. Cincinnati and Dayton went their own ways and made their own contracts. I am aware of the new contract, but okay, cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Gigi, what do you have?
Okay, sorry about that. So this is just, I had 2 questions really. Is there a way we can put the consumer agency guide kind of incorporated into, so because we still have to have the consumer agency guide signed
That's
prior.
right. Yeah. So it could be combined into one document, and I gave some thought to that. But because of some of the specific requirements that the state and the NAR are requiring, it was going to be a very big, long, complicated document. So we opted to just keep it as two documents, which is what most brokerages are doing. So you've got the buyer agency agreement and you've got the consumer guide. And so that, to me, since now we've got two documents that need to be signed, it kind of heightens the importance of having a buyer strategy session and telling them, hey, let's sit down. I want to make sure I understand what you're looking for, and we're going to come up with a great plan for acquiring that property. And so then you have a face-to-face meeting, and then it's easier to say, hey, by the way, the state requires us to have some certain forms. This is a consumer guide to agency relationships. It basically explains how agency works. I would explain that. If you don't mind, take a moment to sign that. This one's an agency, a loyalty agreement. Basically, we're committing to work together. So I would. That's why I think having a face-to-face meeting at a Starbucks or something like that would be the ideal setting for that. But you can also accomplish that through a Zoom call or phone call. So does that make sense?
Yeah, because I do know not having it signed, or even though you talk about it, you still have to have something showing that you did present the consumer agency guide, whether it be verbally over the phone or you just have to have something, even if you write it at the bottom of your sheet saying, presented this over the phone, will get signed at something like that.
Yeah.
The other question I have is, okay, so what if you're working with a buyer and you found out as you're working with the buyer, they actually had a different agent, a few months ago, and that they said they were done with them. They, kind of wasn't local to this area. And so they wanted a local realtor, so they prefer to work with you. And you're working with them, you write an offer, and then the other realtor contacts them and says, hey, how's it going? Did you go look at anything? Have you seen anything? And obviously they didn't know this. And they said, well, I really don't want to work with you anymore. And that agent says, well, you didn't realize it, but when you signed the contract, well, they didn't say you didn't realize it. They just said, when you signed the contract, you signed a buyer agency agreement. And the buyer did not know it. So, and you get this with a lot of the younger people not reading everything as well.
Yeah. It's going to be a mess. If you were to write a book on the dumbest laws and policies that have ever been created, I would say this would be, chapter 1 or 2. It's to put everybody in a contract before looking at a home. What a ridiculous idea. So there's going to be lawsuits. There's going to be people ticked because they didn't realize they're in a contract. There's going to be buyers that will enter into contract with multiple agents, not realizing they're in contract. And then, so there'll be lawsuits, many lawsuits after the deal. So our agreement does say in there that they are stating that they are not in a buyer's agency agreement with another agent. So they're testifying to that in our document. So, if they sign our document and they're also in contract with another agent, then that is a problem for them, because they have opened themselves up to the possibility of getting sued by the first brokerage.
And what really gets me is they didn't even know it, because that agent slipped it in with
Yeah.
the contract when they wrote a
Yeah.
contract, and they just assumed it was all part of the contract forms that they had to sign.
Yeah.
Little did they know they were signing a buyer agency agreement.
Once
And
upon a
that's
time,
really, really deceptive.
once upon a time, we had an agent who was doing that, who would slip in an exclusive buyer agency contract for 365 days, just put it in there with a bunch of other documents and disclosures, and they didn't know what they're signing. And then he wanted to sue them when they went with another agent. And when I found out what he was doing, it's like, okay, you need to go to this other brokerage because we're not a good fit. That's not how we operate.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Dan, I see you've had your hand raised there for a little bit. What do you have, Dan?
Yeah, Chris, Dan Weber here. Two things. The protection period in the loyalty agreements, how about just leaving a blank box there, similar to what's in the exclusive right to sell and buyer agencies agreement that I've been using for years? I personally think 30 days is very weak, and I think it would be advantageous for us as agents to determine that protection period. And from a design standpoint, a little minutia, but the signatures are very close together. Whoever set that up, if you could have them, it looks like there's room at the bottom for them to add a little additional spacing at the bottom of it. But getting back to my first point, again, I think 30 days is very weak, and I think it would be beneficial if that space is just left blank for each agent to make that determination.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. And as we mentioned, this is kind of we're developing it based. It's sort of almost like a crowdsourced document.
Sure.
Because we have great input from our agents as we are traversing this ground that's never been traversed before. So thank you. Actually, if you don't mind, text me that feedback. That way I can have it recorded. Sure.
Yeah. So happy to do so.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Chris.
Greg Zukowski.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, man.
I'm late to the party with all of this. I just wanted to sum up my understanding and then bring up a concern. The understanding is that the purchase agreement trumps all. So basically, anything that's in addendums and or purchase agreement is what's going to be followed or be enforceable from both the listing perspective and the buyer agent's perspective. Is that fair understanding?
Well, sort of. I don't know if I would say it completely obliterates it because if you have an agreement, the way that the NAR has required us to create these documents is that the agent is agreeing to not take any additional compensation from any source over what they are agreeing to in the agency disclosure. So if the purchase contract says that they're paying, let's say you put 2% in your buyer's agency agreement, and the purchase contract says at the bottom that they're going to offer 3% to the buyer's agent, then that does not trump the buyer's agency agreement, because in the buyer's agency agreement, you've agreed to not take more compensation than that. So what you have to do is you have to create a new buyer's agency addendum or buyer's agency agreement, which can be based specifically on that property address or on a new timeline that you prescribe. So that's why our buyer's agency agreement says that this document can be modified at any time by mutual agreement of buyer and agent. So it's a good point. It's good to be aware of that, because you'd hate to get stuck and not be able to get the full commission.
All right, that's a good clarification there. The second concern, since now we're bringing up the negotiation of buyer agent commission. It seems like the low hanging fruit in any negotiation at the multiple renegotiation points, original contract, post inspections, appraisal, final underwriting conditions, that there's going to be an attempt to squeeze the buyer agent commission at all of those points as the low hanging fruit to get a deal through the, to the finish line. What's your kind of strategy to combat that at each of those points, just on a broad level, I guess, is the concern.
Well,
it's going to be like, well, we agreed to pay you, but they're asking for more. Or like, for example, I had a first-time home buyer that was doing down payment assistance, and they could barely qualify, and it's getting tighter and tighter and tighter every step of the way. And the lender, the listing agent, the underwriter, everybody's going to look at the buyer agent and say, well, you could give up your money.
Yeah. That's where I think the buyer's agency agreement will actually be good, because it's a requirement that if it's not paid by the seller, the buyer will pay it. And so it's a signed contract. And so that's to your defense as a buyer's agent. But, it's always going to come down to negotiating, developing your negotiation skills. And there's been a few times over the years where I've negotiated my commission and said, you know what, I'll drop it half a percentage point. Like maybe twice I've done that out of, I can't even imagine how many deals I've done. So in other words, I almost never negotiate my commission. Like I negotiated in that initial contract, and then we're done. Like that's already something that's negotiated. So I'm not going to change that. So that's, I guess, and over the years, there's always been opportunities to ask the buyer's agent to drop their commission. But I'm just, I just say, no, not going to do that.
Well,
what else can we do?
So then, so in that, and I understand over the years, but it was never really in question as much as it's in question going forward at this point.
Yeah.
But, I just anticipate a world where the squeeze is going to be put on, and if you're like, nope, we agreed to this, we signed it. Well, I can't buy the house because I don't have the money to come. They're not paying it. All right, the deal's dead. Then, and now you're in this adversarial situation where they're trying to get a new agent, doing this. Anyways, it's just a thought that came up that seems like that's going to be the low hanging fruit to attack. And obviously having your documentation correct is extremely important.
I am an optimist, and I personally don't feel like that will be any different than it's been for the last 50 years. There's always been thoughts, they can drop their commission. My response has always been, nope, that's not going to happen. What else can we do? So I would go back as a negotiator, buyer's agent. I would go back to the listing agent. I'd say, hey, look, this deal's falling apart. If your sellers aren't willing to pay that, and this deal falls apart, we're going to have to go find a different house. So would you like us to complete the purchase of your house, or are you going to force us to go find another house? And so I would definitely put it back to the listing agent, let them negotiate, let them figure it out. That's just me. And that's part of our job, negotiating. So, but I take a hard line. I don't work for free. I've got to provide for my family, and this is what it looks like. And a lot of agents also keep this in mind. Like if you drop your commission by 1 percentage point, that's a 33% pay drop. So most agents if you take, you know, take your whole MLS, most agents are selling 12 properties or less. Let's say that you're selling 12 properties a year and you drop your commissions by 1%. You've just given yourself a 33% pay reduction. So, I mean, how many people can take a 33% pay cut? I wouldn't. So I don't think we need to be feeling beaten down and like, oh gosh, now we have to take this pay cut. I would just say, this is what I charge. And that's the way I would approach it anyway.
Okay. I know this one's fresh in my head where it was at the 11th hour, the underwriter came back with conditions. The appraisal came in short. Buyers didn't have money, you know, all those situations. So,
hey, no problem. Let's go find another house that fits better.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I know it's painful though. I don't want to minimize the pain. I get it. So, hey, Tim Bowman, man, what do you got?
Yeah, so with all the talk about buyer's agent commissions, can you just talk me through the process where I have the listing? I'm going to assume there will be a little more activity where typically you find people are wanting to go to the listing agent because of this new rule. How do you navigate that dual agency? Are we still thinking that, hey, I negotiated myself 3%, but I forgot to negotiate that if I end up finding the buyer that I would get paid more? Or are we just washing and scrapping that whole idea from the traditional way of doing it and starting with something different? Can you talk me through like dual agency and listing agreements and buyer's compensation when you are the buyer's agent and that sort of thing?
When I am the buyer's agent or when I am
I'm sorry, when you
agent?
also represent the buyer. Yeah, when you're the listing agent to begin with, but you also find the buyer and end up representing the buyer.
Yeah. So the way my personal take on dual agency is that I don't personally have a problem with it as long as I'm honest and truly doing what I can to help each client in the process. Sometimes when I'm the one person in the deal, I can achieve more by being a dual agent, bringing them together. And so I don't necessarily have a problem with dual agency, but that's because I'm honest. And so I can pitch that to my sellers and that this can be a good thing. I'll charge you 6%, 3% will go to a buyer's agent. I'll keep 3%. However, if I can find the buyer, then I'll drop that to 5% or 4% or whatever your numbers are that work for you. So you can set a deal like that. And I think that's fine. If I'm working with buyers, and I'm talking about them going to some other agent to be a dual agent, like I wouldn't trust other agents to be a dual agent. I would trust Plum Tree agents to be dual agents, but man, just Joe Schmo out there. So I would warn my buyer clients, hey, you have to be careful. If you're thinking about going to a listing agent to show you the home, I mean, do you want the same attorney to represent two parties in a lawsuit? Like if someone sued you, would you ask that attorney to represent you too? Of course not. You want your own person representing your needs. So that's kind of how I would frame it if I was working with a buyer. And if I was working with a seller, I would leave that open as an option. Because and as a matter of fact, in this new, and I think Scott Rice has been talking a lot about this recently, one of the biggest opportunities you have as a listing agent now is going to be open houses, because you can show your properties to buyers without having to get them in a buyer's agency agreement at open houses. So that's kind of a cool way to get buyer clients. There's going to be a lot of buyers that are like, screw that. I'm not signing the form. I'm just going to go to the open house. And so there's going to be a great opportunity for open houses. And that might be the number one strategy of the year for the upcoming next 12 months. After we hit August, I would be doing as many open houses everywhere possible. If you don't have a listing, I'd be contacting every agent that has a listing. Hey, you want me to do an open house for you? That's what I would be doing. But I don't even know if I answered your question. Did I answer your question?
About to circle back around to that. So although all that is great information, to kind of clarify what I'm asking, let's say I do pick up open houses as part of my marketing strategy, which is not currently in my tool bag, my toolbox. I don't use that. So let's say I do start using that and I meet buyer clients and they are interested in the home that is being held open and they want to write an offer through me because I'm the listing agent and mostly because they've been educated about this new way of doing business. Where's the advantage, or how would I navigate that with my sellers up front as we were talking about listing compensations? This is what I charge. I highly recommend that you offer a buyer's agent compensation, or we can leave it open to the strength of their offer, all of those conversations. But how do we navigate, where's the extra advantage to us listing agents holding an open house and we do find the buyer? And then we realize, oh, well, we're not a buyer's agent. We got to go renegotiate with our sellers and say, well, now that I am technically representing the other side, I'm getting a little confused. It's getting a little hairy there. And I'm thinking, ugh, that feels like I'm just in it for myself. If I go back and try to renegotiate with my sellers that now, because I'm a dual agent, there should be extra compensation for me for bringing the buyer, which was my job to begin with, if we think about it, to find the buyer.
Yeah, renegotiation is never a part of my process. I always want to get it negotiated right up front. So that's why I would set the listing commission is going to be 5% or 6%.
Okay.
And then part of that will go to the buyer's agent commission. If I am the buyer's agent and like I bring the buyer, then I will discount that to whatever. So that would be my strategic advantage that I would negotiate with them up front.
So that sounds very much like what I'm already doing. This is the full commission. This is how it gets split up. This is what happens if I become the dual agent. So it sounds like we're just going to continue doing that in our negotiation strategy.
That's what I would do. That's right.
Okay. Well, then that clears that up. Thank you. Thanks for your time to answer that question.
Anything for you, man. All right. Greg, did you have another question? I see your hand is raised, so feel free to jump in there if you have another question. And then Scott, I don't know if we've missed any other questions. I know we're doing these marathon sessions on Mondays now because of the this NAR thing, but I think this is really helpful and important.
I think you've been covering a lot of them in I thought I was on mute. You've been covering them.
Okay. Well, with that in mind, I'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and close out. But if you have questions, I know there's going to be a lot of questions. We're going to try to do as many of these, big sessions and keep covering this content as much as we can because it's uncharted territory. But we're definitely here to help you. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. So have a fantastic week. Go make some money.